Hey guys, tonight we're going to do something brave. You're going to wake up as a high-ranking noble in 17th century France, probably Versailles. Congratulations, you're rich. Unfortunately, you're also about to spend an entire day in a palace with no running water, no toilets, and more powdered wigs than ventilation. Your silk sheets are exquisite, your slippers are embroidered, and the gilded ceiling above you is painted with angels, but somewhere beneath all that luxury, there's an unmistakable whiff of yesterday's chamber pot. Sunlight streams through your lace-draped window, which, despite the fine embroidery, does nothing to stop the draft. You shift slightly in your canopied bed. The mattress is stuffed with horsehair. It creaks. A servant stands ready to pull back your bed curtains. He's been waiting, silently, for half an hour. Not creepy at all. And you don't wake up to birdsong, by the way. You wake up to clanging bells, clattering heels, and maybe a chorus of coughing from the corridor. Versailles is beautiful, yes, but peaceful? Not so much. You groggily roll over, only to realize something unpleasant. You really need to pee. And you're not going to find a toilet. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments, too, just for fun. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your bedroom smells faintly of lavender, and something else. A mixture of chamber pot residue, fireplace ash, and old wood. This is normal. In fact, some nobles burned incense or tucked dried herbs under their pillows to help mask that ever-present tang of human existence. It doesn't entirely work. You sit up, and a valet immediately appears to help you don your dressing gown. It's early, but not too early. Fashionably late is more of a dinner thing. For now, your job is simply to look alive and avoid stepping into anything unpleasant on the way to your slipper rack. Yes, there's a whole rack. No, it doesn't help with the smells. Above your bed hangs a portrait of Louis XIV, in full regalia, looking down as if to say, "Did you sleep well?" Because the palace privy is clogged again. It's a known issue. Even with his obsession for grandeur, the Sun King never truly cracked indoor sanitation. Toilets? Optional. Prestige? Mandatory. You begin your day with the grand lever, the royal wake-up ceremony. Even if you're not royalty yourself, you're expected to show up at similar events or reenact your own mini version. If you're important enough, lesser nobles are invited to watch you get dressed. Seriously. Nothing says aristocracy like awkward eye contact while someone buttons your waistcoat. One mainstream historical fact you might like: at Versailles, up to 100 people could attend the king's morning routine. It was a bizarre honor to hold out his sock or adjust his wig. Just imagine trying to brush your teeth while a crowd of dukes cheers you on. Teeth, by the way, are optional. Toothpaste is a grim blend of ash, crushed bone, and mint. And your toothbrush might be made from horsehair. If you're really refined, you rinse your mouth with wine instead of water. Historians still argue whether this helped prevent tooth decay or just gave everyone an early buzz. After gargling some questionable Merlot, you inspect your reflection in the mirror. Your wig, last night's masterpiece, sits on a wooden stand nearby, deflated. You'll need a fresh one. The old one has absorbed too much of yesterday. Wigs are not just fashion statements, they're also functional. Functional in the sense that they cover lice, disguise baldness, and absorb enough powder to choke a horse. The valet starts assembling your outfit. Today's choice? Something simple. Maybe just 14 buttons, lace cuffs the size of umbrellas, and silk breeches so tight you might need help sitting down. There's a little trick to the waistband, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Your feet slip into pointed leather shoes, and you shuffle awkwardly across the floor, trying to recall if the chamber pot was emptied last night. It wasn't. You spot it glinting faintly beneath a bench, a golden bowl with floral engravings and a lid that doesn't quite fit. This, dear friend, is luxury. As you move toward the balcony to catch some fresh air and avoid gagging, you pass by the fireplace. It crackles politely, struggling against the morning chill. You open the shutters. The garden stretches before you, a geometric wonder of hedges, fountains, and the occasional gardener relieving himself discreetly in the shrubbery. You pretend not to notice. You yawn. The day awaits. And it's going to be a long one, full of powdered faces, ceremonial meals, and frantic attempts to find private corners in a palace that has zero privacy. You've survived the first 20 minutes. Congratulations. Still, you glance at the chamber pot again. There's no getting around it. Sooner or later, you'll have to deal with it. For now, you just hope your valet remembered the perfume bottle. Because you're going to need it. You stand there for a moment, staring at the chamber pot like it's an opponent in a duel. It's made of porcelain, trimmed with gilt, and probably crafted by some renowned artisan whose descendants now make luxury candle holders. But despite its dainty look, it's not elegant. It's a chamber pot. It has one job. And unfortunately for you, it's full. You gesture discreetly, and your valet scurries over to handle it, holding the vessel with the same strained dignity one might use to carry a sacred relic. He doesn't flinch. He's done this 100 times. In fact, some servants at Versailles specialized in toilet-related tasks, a surprisingly competitive field in noble households. The job of groom of the stool was an actual title, an elite servant who handled royal bathroom needs. Yes, the person responsible for helping a king wipe was often a nobleman himself, and it could lead to serious political influence. But you? You don't have a groom of the stool. You just have Jacques. And Jacques has seen things. You shuffle toward your commode chair, an actual wooden seat with a hole in the middle, often disguised to look like an innocent piece of furniture. Some were so well crafted you might not realize their purpose until it was too late. In fact, nobles frequently sat on these chairs during meetings. Scholars still debate whether this was symbolic power or just poor interior design. The process begins. There's no toilet paper, of course. That's centuries away. Instead, you might use soft linen cloths, moss, or, brace yourself, a handful of hay. Some swore by a square of wool soaked in rose water. Others preferred newspaper, but that's more of a 19th century luxury. You make do. If you're lucky, someone remembered to light a bundle of herbs by the fireplace. Dried lavender, rosemary, and thyme hang from hooks on the wall, both decorative and functional. Their purpose? To mask the realities of noble digestion. And those realities are frequent. You had oysters, cheese, and 3 glasses of wine last night. Enough said. You don't linger. Even the prettiest commode is still a commode. Once finished, your valet reappears like a magician's assistant, sweeping the pot away without comment. Where does it go? That depends. In some cases, it's dumped out a window. In others, it's carried to a sluice room, where servants empty dozens of similar pots into a cesspit or trench behind the estate. Versailles had over 100 such pits, often overflowing. Visitors complained of the stench, and yet the parties raged on. A fringe tidbit: some nobles proudly owned silver chamber pots engraved with their initials. It was a statement piece. Behold, they seemed to say, my behind only touches the finest metals. Now relieved and marginally less grumpy, you're ready for your real dressing. The valet returns with 2 other attendants to begin the ceremonial process of clothing you in layers. Undergarments, stockings, breeches, shirt, waistcoat, and finally the coat, embroidered with thread that probably cost more than most people's houses. But here's the thing: once dressed, going to the bathroom again becomes a minor tragedy. Some outfits required partial undressing just to squat. Buttons go halfway down your thigh, laces wrap around the waist, and everything is tight. Like breath control tight. So, you learn the art of managing your needs. You don't drink too much. You develop an internal clock. You prepare mentally for holding it in until sunset. It's not just survival. It's noble survival. You move to the grooming corner, where a silver basin awaits. No running water, someone poured it from a jug moments ago. You splash your face, pat it dry with a linen cloth, and accept a dab of rosewater from your valet. Deodorant doesn't exist yet, but perfume does. You'll wear enough to kill a small bird. A brush runs through your hair, or what's left of it. Then comes the wig. Today's selection is a mid-length powdered style, ideal for court appearances and minor ceremonies. Powder is applied via bellows, often while you hold your breath. Some nobles went blind from repeated exposure. Others just coughed themselves into early retirement. You look in the mirror. You are pale, powdered, perfumed, and perched on top of several layers of silk and starch. You are ready to face the day. But let's be honest, you'd give anything for an indoor bathroom. You step out into the hallway, joining other nobles as they converge toward the public rooms. The smell? A mix of musk, smoke, and the quiet despair of 20 chamber pots being emptied too late. Everyone pretends not to notice. This is courtly life: ignore the mess, praise the fragrance, and never talk about the pots. One joke circulating among courtiers is that the king once tried to bathe twice in 1 week and was warned against excessive moisture. Bathing was rare. Too much water was believed to weaken the body. Instead, nobles changed their linen shirts frequently and used scented powders liberally. It's said Louis XIV bathed only a handful of times in his life. Historians still argue whether this was a personal quirk or a broader cultural belief. Your friend the Comte de Villiers greets you with a bow. His breath smells faintly of brandy and cloves. He hasn't used his chamber pot yet today, and you can tell, he's walking like someone who's bargaining with fate. Together, you make your way to the antechamber, where the day's rituals are about to begin. The palace glows gold in the morning light. You stand upright, stomach slightly clenched, bladder moderately empty, head full of powdered glory. You survive the morning. Barely. You're finally out in the palace corridors, and already the powdered air feels different. There's a faint haze of starch, perfume, and hot candle wax drifting through the halls, carried on the shuffle of slippers and the whisper of brocade skirts. It's time for the next noble ritual. Your face must be painted like a porcelain doll and your head disguised in theatrical flourishes of hair. Welcome to the courtly morning routine, where presentation is everything, and sanitation is optional. You make your way to the dressing salon. There's no privacy, just open space filled with elegant chairs, screens, and the sound of soft coughs and shuffling wigs. Your valet produces a velvet case of grooming tools. This is where things get a little intense. First, your skin must be prepared. A damp cloth, perhaps dipped in rosewater, wipes down your face to remove the light sheen of sleep and sweat. If you're lucky, the cloth was clean this week. If not, well, you're about to share a few germs with yesterday's face. Then comes the white lead powder. Yes, lead. The standard of French noble beauty is pallor, a ghostly complexion to show you've never worked a day in the sun. The powder is thick, dry, and clings like a second skin. It cakes in the lines of your face. It also slowly poisons you. But you look fabulous. A bit of rouge brightens your cheeks. Some nobles dab on little beauty patches, tiny black velvet circles shaped like stars or hearts, placed strategically to signal flirtation, elegance, or just to cover up a pock scar. Historians still argue whether these patches were primarily cosmetic or a form of secret code among courtly lovers. Either way, you've got one just beside your lip today. Très chic. Then it's time for the wig. You sit still as your valet dusts it with more powder, rice flour, if you're fancy, plain white if you're frugal, or out of rice. The wig is perched atop your natural hair, which is slicked down with animal fat and tied in a queue. Today's style is modest, long curls, but not too wide, with a little ribbon at the back. Fringe detail: some nobles kept mice in their wigs, accidentally or otherwise. The warmth and scent attracted small creatures, and it wasn't uncommon to feel a gentle tickle at your temple mid-conversation. Servants were instructed to inspect wigs daily, though few did more than glance. You examine yourself in the mirror. Pale. Fragrant. Perfectly ridiculous. You look like a character in an opera, and that's exactly the point. A footman arrives bearing a silver tray of morning chocolate. Not a bar, mind you, a thick, spiced drink served hot, rich with cinnamon and sugar. Chocolate is fashionable now, recently imported from the Americas, and only the finest households serve it at breakfast. You sip carefully. It's delicious, but dangerous. Too much, and you'll be making an emergency trip to the hedge maze. Again. Speaking of which, you start making mental calculations. How long until your next chance to step out discreetly? You already used the chamber pot once. Twice would be noticeable. You make a vow, no more chocolate. Probably. Out in the salons, the rest of court is preparing themselves. Some are having their wigs powdered by assistants. Others are already gossiping. The murmur of noble voices echoes through the antechambers. You hear laughter. You also hear someone coughing wetly into a scented handkerchief. Consumption is fashionable this year. As you stroll past the window, a gust of wind lifts your coat just enough to reveal your garters. Scandalous. But only mildly. You adjust and pretend nothing happened. Nobles have perfected the art of ignoring minor social disasters. You pass a mirror, one of many in Versailles. The palace is famed for its reflective walls. Some say it's for vanity, others argue it was a form of surveillance. Either way, it's hard not to catch yourself mid-stride and think, is that really me? You pause in the hallway, watching two women adjust their enormous panniers, those wide wire skirts that force people to walk sideways through doorways. A footman accidentally knocks over a chamber pot that was tucked behind a tapestry. Everyone pretends not to notice. The sound echoes faintly through the hall. A passing noblewoman wafts her perfumed glove in your direction. You bow slightly. Her eyes sparkle, but the air around her smells like oranges in decay. You suspect her wig has not been washed in, ever. The use of scented gloves is a classic noble trick. Leather gloves were soaked in lavender, civet, or ambergris and worn constantly. Not just for fashion, but to mask unpleasant odors, both ambient and personal. In fact, some nobles held a perfumed glove to their nose while passing through crowded salons. A subtle hint: you smell. But I shall pretend you don't. Your stomach growls. It's almost time for the mid-morning procession. That's when you gather to await a glimpse of the king as he walks to chapel. You'll need to be ready, immaculate, composed, and, ideally, not desperate for a toilet. You glance around. There's no way to slip away right now. Too many eyes. So you shift your weight and practice your courtly smile, which is half grimace, half smirk, and entirely insincere. You're beginning to understand something crucial about noble life: it's not about comfort. It's about appearing comfortable while slowly losing circulation in your legs, fending off lice, and pretending your bladder doesn't exist. And yet, there's a strange charm to it all: the rustle of silk, the light from crystal chandeliers, the orchestra warming up in the distance. You're part of a living performance, a 24-hour masquerade where everyone knows the lines but no one admits the script exists. One last brush of powder to your shoulders. One last inspection in the mirror. Then you step into the salon like it's a stage. The audience is already here. You glide into the salon with all the grace your shoes will allow, which is to say, not much. The heels are high, the floor is slippery, and you're doing your best not to trip over the train of a duchess's gown. Welcome to the royal audience chamber, where everyone is dressed like a birthday cake and no one dares mention the smell. Today, you're hoping for a glimpse of the king himself. Louis, the current Sun King, is notorious for punctual grandeur. He walks a precise route from his private chambers to the chapel each morning, and being seen along that route is both a privilege and a performance. You've staked out a good position near the tall windows, with a decent sight line and, more importantly, some airflow. The breeze carries hints of dew, lavender, and something earthier. You decide not to look down. Around you, other nobles are murmuring pleasantries. Everyone's voice is low, cultured, tinged with competition. The subject of conversation might be last night's concert, the arrival of a foreign diplomat, or someone's unfortunate wardrobe malfunction during the masquerade. But behind it all lies the real tension: who will be noticed by the king? Who will receive a glance, a nod, perhaps even a word? You shift slightly and instantly regret it. That third layer of silk riding up your spine? Not ideal. Worse still, your bladder has begun its second act. You try to focus on anything but that. A violinist in the far corner tunes her strings. A group of ladies-in-waiting giggles softly near the stair. A marquis drops his glove and spends far too long picking it up. And you? You clench politely and practice looking serene. Now here's the thing: there are no toilets anywhere near here. Not a single one. The palace was designed to awe, not to function. Instead, hidden behind some of the paneling are small stools, basic wooden contraptions tucked discreetly in corners. They're not even rooms. Just nooks. Occasionally, nobles would use them mid-conversation, turning slightly away, continuing to speak as if nothing were happening. Historians still argue whether this reflects a lack of privacy norms or simply extreme time efficiency. You, however, are not that bold. You decide to endure. The grand doors open with a creak, and the murmurs cease instantly. The king is coming. A flurry of motion, the rustle of skirts, the clatter of swords adjusting at hips, the brief panic of someone realizing their wig is askew. You straighten your back and raise your chin. And then, there he is. Louis XIV enters in a blaze of gold, his coat embroidered with suns, his shoes sparkling with diamonds. He walks slowly, deliberately, surrounded by an entourage that includes a bishop, 2 dukes, 3 pages, and a physician who looks like he hasn't blinked since 1680. The king does not smile. He glances from side to side, acknowledging his court with an almost bored nod. You hold your breath. Not because of the grandeur, but because someone nearby has clearly made use of the discreet corner and the breeze is not on your side. Still, you bow. Deep, elegant, rehearsed. Everyone does. The king passes, and for a moment, you believe he might glance your way. He doesn't. He's focused ahead, likely already composing his expression for chapel. But the marquis beside you, he gets a nod. You clench your jaw and clap quietly. It's the courtly thing to do. Once the king has passed, the atmosphere loosens. Conversation resumes, though quieter now. You drift into a cluster of nobles discussing the latest fountain renovations in the gardens. One of them mentions, very offhandedly, that a statue was moved last week to cover a popular relieving spot. Everyone laughs politely and pretends they've never used it. Then someone brings up a rumor that a duchess fainted yesterday during her audience, not from emotion, but from an overfull bladder. She had waited 4 hours, corseted tightly, unable to excuse herself. You murmur a sympathetic noise, all while realizing you're 2 hours away from a similar fate. You decide to make a subtle exit. A nod here, a bow there, a murmured "excuse me, my lord." You edge toward the rear door, the one with less foot traffic. You know what lies beyond it, a hallway, a servant's passage, and, if you're lucky, a staircase leading down to the gardens. Your shoes echo softly as you tread the marble floor. Paintings line the walls, past kings, battle scenes, hunting dogs. You pause briefly by a tapestry, mostly to shift your weight and release the pressure on your poor abdomen. The hallway is thankfully empty. You move quickly now. Halfway to the door, you're stopped by Madame de Lignières, an older countess who believes every conversation must last at least 15 minutes. She clasps your arm warmly and begins recounting her dream from the night before. It involves swans, pastries, and a violin that burst into flame. You nod along, eyes darting to the door. Each passing minute feels like a test of endurance. And then, a savior. Her lapdog barks at a passing mouse, and she excuses herself to investigate. You whisper a thank you to the tiny dog and slip out the door. The air outside hits you like a blessing. Cooler, fresher, scented with roses and something vaguely manure-like, but you'll take it. You're still not safe, but you're closer. You know the route. Past the orangery, along the hedge maze, and just behind the marble statue of Neptune is your salvation, a small stone alcove, hidden from view, where nobles have been relieving themselves since the garden's completion. You pick up your pace, shoes squelching slightly in the gravel, coat billowing. The statue comes into view. And you make it. Just barely. A sigh of relief escapes you, louder than it should be. The hedges absorb it. The garden birds sing on, utterly indifferent. You are a noble. You are refined. You have powdered your face and bowed to the king. And you just peed in a bush. You linger behind the marble statue a moment longer, pretending to admire Neptune's trident while discreetly adjusting your coat. A breeze stirs the leaves above, carrying with it the whisper of rustling skirts and murmuring courtiers elsewhere in the gardens. No one sees you. Or if they do, they pretend not to. That's the code, discretion cloaked in dignity, even when your dignity is, quite literally, tucked into your breeches. Relieved and reset, you begin the slow stroll back to the main palace, stepping carefully to avoid the garden's less maintained gravel paths. You're halfway through the maze-like walk when you encounter a familiar sound, the delicate fluttering of fans and the slightly hushed tones of whispered gossip. Ah, yes. The true power network of Versailles, the Salon of Secrets, also known as any hallway with 3 noble women and at least 1 chaise longue. You pause at a marble bench under a trellised arch, catching the scent of jasmine mixed with something less botanical, perhaps a reminder that someone else found this alcove convenient earlier. No matter. The court's olfactory cocktail always includes a hint of humanity. Across the path, a cluster of court ladies sits in a circle like rare birds on display. Fans flutter with military precision, snapping open and shut, concealing smiles, revealing raised brows. Conversations here are never just conversations. They're coded performances. An innocent comment about lacework might actually be a damning critique of someone's illegitimate child. A sigh about the weather could mask a political insult. You wander closer. Not enough to intrude, just enough to listen. He claimed it was eau de cologne, one whispers, but it was clearly last night's broth. Polite titters follow. One woman coughs discreetly into her perfumed handkerchief. You note the faint shimmer of sweat on her upper lip. It's not even midday, and the heat is already curling the edges of her wig. Another lady leans in and murmurs, "Have you heard about the Duc de Voren's valet? Caught emptying the pot into a violin case." Gasp. Laughter. Shocked delight. Someone mutters, "That poor violin." You offer a gentle bow as you pass, and they return it with practiced smiles. One tilts her fan slightly, signaling approval or perhaps an invitation. Historians still argue whether fan gestures formed a full-fledged courtly language or were simply flourishes of idle hands. Either way, you do your best to look uninterested and deeply intriguing. Fringe fact: fans at Versailles were considered essential accessories, both for communication and, more urgently, to wave away the ever-present sense of the human body. A fashionable noble might carry a fan dipped in perfume or even a tiny sponge tucked into the handle, soaked in vinegar and herbs. It wasn't just to smell nice, it was a defense mechanism. You continue past the flowering hedges, re-entering the palace through a side corridor where fewer nobles tread. The walls here are older, the paintings less pristine. One of them depicts a mythological scene, perhaps Venus and Mars, though Venus looks suspiciously like a duchess you saw at breakfast. You don't linger to confirm. Back in the main hall, the clamor resumes. Servants hustle silently, avoiding eye contact. A page nearly trips over an unattended chamber pot tucked beneath a stool. He writes it, gives a brief look of existential despair, and continues on. You pass a small alcove where 2 gentlemen are arguing in low voices. One gestures sharply toward the wall, possibly accusing the other of jumping for the hidden commode behind the tapestry. You decide not to get involved. As you make your way toward the portrait gallery, you notice the return of a familiar discomfort. No, not biological, social. The kind that creeps in when you realize you're 2 degrees removed from the current rumor cycle and someone else just got an invitation you didn't. You stop beside a tall window, peering out over the manicured lawns. Below, a gardener hauls a wheelbarrow filled with soil and possibly something else. The nobles above sip their chocolate, while the peasants below shovel waste. It's not exactly a metaphor. It's daily life. Suddenly, a scent sharp enough to wake a bishop drifts in through the window. You recoil slightly. Somewhere, someone has emptied a chamber pot out the window again, ignoring the official ban. The practice was technically forbidden at Versailles, but enforcement was lax, and the bushes near the north wall had seen things no shrub should ever witness. You close the window gently. No one notices. The gallery around you is filled with tourists of the time, foreign diplomats, minor nobles, the occasional playwright, all trying to look important while avoiding the worst of the stink. You glance to your left and see a young nobleman discreetly applying more perfume to his collar. He notices your gaze and shrugs. "Clove oil," he says. "It burns the nose, but it gets the job done." You nod, grateful for honesty. A clock chimes somewhere deep in the palace. It's almost time for the midday meal. You'll have to freshen up, again, and try to find a seat not adjacent to anyone with a visibly steaming peruke. You consider ducking into one of the unofficial relieving nooks, just in case. The memory of the earlier garden incident is still fresh. You check your reflection in a nearby mirror. Your powder is holding. Your wig has survived. Your breeches are, miraculously, still comfortably secured. And yet, beneath all this finery, you are very much aware, there is no plumbing. There are no toilets. You are in one of the grandest palaces on earth, and everyone is pretending not to notice that the smell of lilacs is doing way too much heavy lifting. But that's the life of a French noble. Equal parts grace and gas. The lunch bell chimes with ceremonial flourish, a trio of soft gongs echoing through the palace halls like an overly polite summons to battle. You adjust your cuffs and prepare your stomach, not just for the food, but for the spectacle. Because at Versailles, eating is rarely about hunger. It's theater. A performance with roasted swan and 20 staring witnesses. You head toward the grand salle à manger, the ceremonial dining hall, where the table is already groaning under the weight of dishes. Long loaves of bread, wheels of cheese, bowls of stewed prunes, artfully stacked pheasant legs, glistening jellied fish, and something mysterious in a lidded tureen that looks suspiciously like it could stare back. It smells impressive. In the way a very rich compost pile might impress a botanist. Now here's the part that may surprise you, there are no forks. Or at least, not as many as you'd hope. French nobles were famously hesitant to adopt forks during the 17th century. Spoons and knives were standard, but fingers were still the most reliable utensils. You eye the platter of stuffed quail and quietly accept your fate. You reach in delicately, 2 fingers only, as etiquette demands. You're careful not to stain your sleeve, which would be a social tragedy greater than minor treason. A valet stands behind you, watching for the moment your goblet empties. He swoops in and refills it with wine that smells faintly of oak and vinegar. Water is not to be trusted. It might look clean, but it carries diseases no one wants to name. Wine, at least, is fermented. And comforting. And more or less expected at every meal. You glance around. The Duchess of Armentières is already on her 3rd course, elegantly balancing a dripping chicken leg in her sense of superiority. To your left, a marquis dabs at his powdered nose with a lace cloth, pausing between bites to recount a tale of his recent intestinal rebellion. Too much fig compote, apparently. Somewhere under the table, a dog barks. Yes, dogs roam the palace freely. Some belong to courtiers, others are tolerated by the staff. It's said that Louis XIV himself allowed them, believing their presence brought warmth and comfort. Of course, warmth is one thing. Random puddles under the table? That's another. You shift slightly, hoping what you just stepped in was spilled sauce. As you pick at a plate of artichoke hearts and veal brains, don't ask, just chew. You notice a servant quietly wheeling away an object draped in linen. You know what it is. The morning's chamber pots, collected and covered, being wheeled out like unwanted guests. There's a servant assigned just for this job, and no one speaks to him. He's a ghost. A necessary one. This is a good time to point out that meals at Versailles were often served in multiple courses called services. You're in the middle of the first service now. The second will involve pastries, molded jellies, perhaps a selection of candied fruits. If you're lucky, something with almond milk. If you're unlucky, another unlabeled organ meat. A fringe tidbit: the art of sugar sculpting is at its peak right now. Elaborate sugar figurines decorate the table, miniature stags, tiny castles, even edible portraits of royalty. One time, a noble's likeness was rendered in marzipan and accidentally eaten by a hungry child. Scandalous. You take another bite of something that may be eel, trying not to think about the fact that there's still no clear plan for your next bathroom break. The garden statue route? Already used. The chapel alcove? Risky. Mass is about to begin. The conversation around you drifts from theater to weather to someone's scandalous decision to rewear a brocade waistcoat 2 weeks in a row. You nod politely, interjecting where appropriate, trying not to appear too focused on the growing tightness in your gut. It's not just the corset-like waistbands of noble fashion, it's the food. Rich. Creamy. Heavy. Delicious in theory. Diabolical in practice. You reach for a candied pear and make eye contact with a young viscount across the table. He raises his eyebrows as if to say, "It's a gamble, isn't it?" You nod. Unspoken understanding. You're both players in the same porcelain-less opera. As the final course arrives, cheese, naturally, the air thickens with the smell of overripe brie and overperfumed nobles. The windows are cracked, but it barely helps. A cloud of rosewater, body heat, and digestive optimism hangs low over the table like a curtain. You try not to breathe too deeply. A court musician strikes up a gentle melody in the corner, strumming a lute. It's meant to aid digestion. Historians still debate whether this practice was symbolic or based on a belief that music soothed the internal organs. Either way, you're grateful for the distraction. Just as you're considering a discreet exit, a footman drops a silver tray. The clatter pierces the hum of conversation, and everyone gasps. The king is not here, thankfully, so the reaction is theatrical rather than fatal. The footman stammers an apology and is swiftly ushered out of the room. Possibly to be reassigned. Possibly to be sent to the kitchens to wash pots. Actual pots. Not chamber pots. Probably. You use the moment to your advantage, rising slowly and murmuring an excuse about needing air. No one questions it. Half of them are likely considering the same escape plan. You retreat from the table with all the grace you can muster, nodding to the servants as you pass. In the corridor, the light is dimmer, the air cooler. You lean briefly against a column, feeling the pressure in your middle rise like a barometer before a storm. You know you'll need to step out again soon. But where? The good spots are always occupied by those with better connections. You sigh and begin walking toward the west wing, hoping one of the lesser-used parlors is unoccupied, and comes with a commode chair tucked discreetly behind the screen. It's a noble life. You dine in gold-plated glory. And pray your intestines play along. You turn down the west corridor, pacing past the bust of Louis XIII that appears to be judging you hard. It's not your fault that digestion in the 17th century was a game of chance. Even the most stoic noble couldn't survive a full Versailles luncheon without consequences. The meal was extravagant, yes, but now you're paying the toll. The hallway narrows, and you pass through a velvet curtain into one of the palace's quieter wings. The air here is slightly less perfumed, slightly more honest. The scent of floor wax, dust, and lingering, organic undertones greets your senses like an old friend. This area was meant for retreat, for nobles needing a moment away from the prying eyes of court. Or, more urgently, a place to answer nature's call without using Neptune as a shield again. You scan the room. No servants. No noble women. Just you, two worn chairs, a fireplace, and, yes, a discreetly placed folding screen in the corner. You tiptoe over and peek behind it. There it is, the humble hero of Versailles survival. A commode chair. It's carved from walnut, lined with tapestry fabric, and features delicate clawfoot legs. Elegant. Dignified. Completely impractical for long-term storage of anything but pretense. The seat lifts to reveal a porcelain bowl, barely used today. You let out a breath you didn't realize you'd been holding. You position yourself, grateful for the moment of privacy. Through the thin wall, you hear the faint sounds of conversation, someone recounting a hunting trip gone awry, involving a boar, 2 spaniels, and an insulted viscount. You clench your teeth. Focus. Here's the thing, French nobles took relieving themselves wherever and whenever necessary. The palace lacked sufficient toilets or even designated latrines. So people made do, with chamber pots, with commode chairs, with secluded corners behind furniture. At one point, it's said the king himself kept a commode throne just behind a curtain in his council chamber. The government of France may have literally been run from a golden toilet. And yet, there were rules. Etiquette books from the time detail precisely how one should relieve oneself discreetly. For example, never make eye contact while seated, always cough to mask certain sounds, and absolutely never speak to anyone while doing so. Unless, of course, they were also seated, then it was considered polite to at least nod. You, thankfully, are alone. As you finish and prepare to reassemble your ensemble, an adventure in its own right, you notice something carved into the underside of the chair's lid. It's a date. 1671, and beneath it, a tiny engraving of a crown. This commode once belonged to someone very important. You sit a little straighter. There's a sort of camaraderie in knowing the royal backside once graced this very spot. Once done, you close the lid gently and dab your hands with rosewater-soaked linen from a nearby stand. Soap exists, but it's reserved for laundry and servants. Nobles prefer scent over sanitation. It's a philosophy. A fragrant, vaguely dangerous philosophy. You exit the parlor with a new spring in your step. Crisis averted. You rejoin the palace flow near the central corridor, nodding casually to passing nobles, all of whom appear composed on the outside and possibly suffering digestive doom within. No one says anything, but there's a mutual understanding. You're all just a few overcooked pigeons away from tragedy. As you wander through the salon once more, you consider your options. A walk through the gardens again? Risky, after that last incident. Perhaps a carriage ride around the estate? Safer, but often occupied by those higher in rank. You settle instead on a classic pastime, pretending to admire the art while scoping out potential relief zones. You stop at a vast tapestry depicting a Roman triumph. The horses look constipated. You feel seen. A nearby noble leans in beside you. Marvelous detail, he says, gesturing toward the centurion's embroidered cape. You nod, offering a noncommittal hum, both of you avoiding the obvious, the stench wafting from somewhere near the statue base. Fringe tidbit: many nobles carried small pomanders, spheres filled with aromatic herbs, pinned to their belts or worn as necklaces. These were not just fashionable accessories but survival tools. One whiff of Versailles summer halls and you'd understand why. Some pomanders even had compartments to separate soothing herbs from emergency strength cloves. You toy with the idea of commissioning one. As the hour stretches on, the scent grows thicker. Afternoon heat turns perfume into a weapon. The mixture of sweating bodies, drying chamber pots, and floral overkill begins to take its toll. You duck into the orangery for a breath of citrus-scented air and immediate relief. But you're not alone. A pair of court poets are locked in a heated argument about metaphor usage. You stand by the lemon trees, pretending to admire the foliage, when you hear the unmistakable sound of someone relieving themselves behind a column. You look the other way. As does everyone else. That's the etiquette. Hear no evil. Smell no evil. Pretend it was the roses. Historians still argue whether nobles genuinely accepted these habits or simply endured them in the name of protocol. Some letters from the era show frustration, nobles complaining about the filth, the smell, the sheer absurdity of having to act refined while navigating puddles of pee in the hallway. Others were oddly proud, viewing such indifference as proof of superiority. We are above discomfort, they seem to say, even when our shoes are soaked. You, personally, are somewhere in the middle. You love the clothes, the dancing, the luxury. But deep down, you'd trade it all for a porcelain flush. You sigh and begin the slow return to the main chambers. The evening is approaching. More food. More wine. More opportunity for intestinal rebellion. You steel yourself for the next round. But for now, you've found balance. You're powdered. You're perfumed. You're at peace. And your feet are dry. By now, you've developed a sixth sense for timing your digestion. That little twitch in your stomach. It means you've got about 45 minutes before your britches become a prison. And you've already used the garden. And the commode chair in the west parlor. The stakes are rising. But for the moment, you can relax somewhat. The midday sun has passed, casting soft golden light through the palace's high windows. Servants are bustling to prepare the evening festivities, lighting candles, adjusting cushions, and, in a few unfortunate cases, mopping up an accident near the eastern wing. You pass them as discreetly as possible. One servant makes the sign of the cross while carrying a sloshing porcelain bowl. You nod sympathetically. It's that time again, time for the noble's gentle afternoon digestive. But for you, it's something more perilous, a test of fortitude. Because what comes next is cheese. And cream. And fruit compote laced with brandy and questionable raisins. You enter the salon de degustation, where the smell of warm milk and sugar hangs in the air like a silk curtain soaked in dessert wine. A long table is set with delicacies, tart tatin, orange custards, a mound of glistening cherries that still have stems, and a towering cheese wheel that seems to sweat in defiance of the season. The nobles lounge on settees, already half reclined like Roman emperors digesting their third helping of indulgence. You greet a few acquaintances with a court-approved smile, mouth turned just enough, eyes glazed from either wine or willpower. A countess offers you a bite of her candied figure. You accept it with a bow and an internal prayer. Please let this fig behave. Now, your knowledge of the digestive risks is not just hearsay. You've lived them. Last season, after an enthusiastic evening of saffron pears and stuffed partridge, you spent 3 hours pacing the South Gallery, trying not to pass out. You eventually had to excuse yourself to the stables. The horses were startled. You don't want to relive that. Still, you take a cautious bite of crème brûlée, avoiding the burned sugar crust. You chew slowly. Nobles don't inhale food, they perform the act of enjoying it, like a slow dance between fork, if you're lucky enough to have one, and lip. The servants refill your goblet. You shake your head. One more drop of muscat and your insides might start plotting their exit. Across the room, a poet is reading aloud. Something about the gentle lament of a rose at dusk. It's vaguely pleasant, mostly because it distracts you from the gurgling sounds now coming from somewhere behind you. You don't know if it's a person or a platter, but it's not a great sign either way. You sit on the edge of a brocade chaise, watching candlelight flicker in the polished silver. The glint is hypnotic. Almost peaceful. Almost. Until someone lets out a soft cough, and the unmistakable sound of a muffled belch. You glance toward the source, the Duc de Merlis, red-faced, blinking slowly, his powdered wig slightly askew. He waves off a servant with a strained smile. Delightful, he says, though he looks like he's 2 minutes from collapse. This is the problem of noble dining, opulence over restraint. You are expected to enjoy everything, but punished, digestively, for doing so. A vicious cycle, hidden under lace cuffs and embroidered napkins. One mainstream historical fact for you: Louis XIV's court maintained a tradition called the Grand Couvert, where the royal family dined in front of an audience. Nobles would gather to watch them eat. Not speak. Not engage. Just watch. It was considered the highest privilege, to witness the king chew. You shift your legs to ease the growing pressure in your abdomen. Someone passes by, their perfume a blend of jasmine and desperation. You smile weakly. Another fun tidbit: nobles believed that flatulence was a sign of healthy digestion, but only if done discreetly. Hence the invention of fart pillows, embroidered cushions stuffed with moss or straw to muffle unexpected outbursts. Whether they worked is highly debatable. Historians still argue whether the famed digestive walks were truly about post-meal leisure or a subtle excuse to sneak into the bushes. You rise from your seat and announce, to no one in particular, "I believe a stroll is in order." A few heads nod. One lady blinks at you, eyes slightly panicked. She might be in the same boat. You hope she finds her nearest exit soon. You exit the salon with practiced elegance, resisting the urge to break into a jog. The hallway is mercifully empty. You take a right, past the music room, past the fresco of a cherub who now feels like he's judging you, and aim for the servant's stare. this isn't just a staircase. It's a portal to lower traffic zones, where nobles can gather their thoughts, adjust their garters, and, if needed, unload a fig tart behind a discreet curtain. You reach the landing and pause to listen. Silence. You slip through a narrow door into what was once a sewing room. It's now unofficially known as the quiet chair room. Because it has two things, a screen and a chair. The kind with a suspiciously wide base. And thank the powdered heavens, it's unoccupied. You slide behind the screen, undo the necessary buttons, there are so many, and sit with great caution. You made it. Again. Barely. A moth flutters in the corner. Somewhere, a mouse scratches in the wall. You close your eyes and let the room spin gently around you. In this moment, you are not a marquis. Not a guest of the king. You are a human being, defeated by custard, saved by upholstery. You sit in the quiet chair room for a moment longer than is strictly necessary, savoring the stillness. The breeze through the cracked window tickles the powdered curls of your wig, and for once, you don't care. Your stomach has settled. Your dignity, slightly bruised, is intact. And above all else, you are alone. Until the door creaks open. You freeze. A pair of soft footsteps enters. There's a pause. Then a voice, low and nasal, murmurs, "Oh, apologies." A shadow retreats. You both pretend the encounter didn't happen. It's the noble way. You rise carefully, adjust your breeches, and pat your coat flat. Your cravat is a little off-center now, but honestly, who could blame you? You make your way out, back into the palace corridor, feeling like you've just returned from battle. As you walk, you pass one of the many parlors used for polite conversation. A quartet of ladies reclines on fainting couches, dabbing at their temples with lemon-scented cloths. They aren't fainting. They're just digesting. Very slowly. In corsets. You nod respectfully. They nod back with equally strained grace. Now comes the next ordeal, the scent gauntlet. You see, while you've been navigating your internal storm, others have taken a more olfactory approach to survival. Perfume. Lots of it. The court is a battlefield of competing fragrances. You walk through one salon and get hit with a wave of violets. Another, it's clove oil, heavy musk, and a faint trail of something that might be ambergris or last week's goose. Your nose twitches. Your eyes water. And then, glory of glories, you spot the gloved hands. Dozens of them. Scented gloves, the noble's secret weapon. Fashionable, functional, and absolutely everywhere. You slip into the glove salon, yes, that's a thing, and are immediately enveloped in an atmosphere of delicate leather and floral oils. A servant approaches with a tray of options. Civet? Rose? Aged bergamot? You select lavender. Always reliable. As he helps you into the gloves, you note the faint stains on his own sleeves, powder, maybe. Or something less poetic. Gloves in place, you breathe through them discreetly, as others do. It's not considered rude. On the contrary, it's elegant. If anything, it implies you're sensitive to aesthetic experience, and not just trying to survive a palace that smells like cheese, sweat, and dying lilies. A passing baron offers you a nod of solidarity. His gloves are soaked in vetiver and vinegar, a combination meant to ward off the bad airs once believed to spread illness. Miasma theory, they called it. Historians still debate whether nobles believed the theory out of conviction or convenience. It certainly justified carrying around pomanders and perfumed fans like weapons of dignity. You proceed down the gallery where footmen have begun lighting hundreds of candles for the evening's events. The heat builds again. Wax softens. Sweat blooms beneath wigs. You pass a mirror and catch your reflection, face powdered, eyes slightly bloodshot, gloved hands raised to your nose like a damsel in distress. You look both ridiculous and entirely correct. Across the room, the Duchesse de Ferran has collapsed, not from illness, but from exposure to a particularly offensive cologne someone introduced earlier. Her maid fans her furiously with a decorative handkerchief. She waves it off. Too much patchouli, she gasps, and then requests someone spritz the air with orange blossom. You move on. You've learned when to linger and when to escape. You settle onto a cushioned bench near the musician's alcove. A quartet is tuning up, soft strings, gentle chords. You can almost forget that you're sitting next to a hidden chamber pot. Because, yes, they're everywhere. Behind panels. Under footstools. In closets. Even beneath the dais where the king receives visitors. It's no secret. Everyone knows. But like most uncomfortable things in Versailles, it is simply not discussed. One of the palace's many unspoken laws: don't ask what's under the furniture. You lean over casually and sniff. Just a hint of rose oil and cabbage? You quickly readjust and fix your gaze on the cellist. Much safer. A valet approaches, offering a tray of scented cloths. You select one infused with mint and press it delicately to your temples. Another noble nearby is applying vinegar water behind his ears. It's a trend now, supposedly balances the humors. Or maybe just distracts the nose. Fringe tidbit: some nobles line the insides of their shoes with dried herbs, rosemary, bay leaves, or even marjoram. Supposedly to ward off bad smells rising from the marble floors. In practice, your feet still stink, but now they smell rustic. You glance down at your own shoes, two-tone leather, buckled, slightly scuffed. You remind yourself to request a lemon polish for tomorrow. Not for shine, for scent. And here's the odd part: despite the heat, the odors, the looming sense that someone just passed gas near the tapestry of St. Louis, it's still beautiful. The music floats. The candlelight dances. The court hums with artificial delight. Because at Versailles, appearances matter more than comfort. The scent of civet might choke you, but heaven forbid anyone sees you wrinkle your nose. It's all part of the performance. You rise again, now gloved, scented, and fortified by lavender and stubborn pride. You've made it through another round of olfactory warfare. You check the time. The evening is approaching fast. Soon, it will be time for the main event: dinner, dancing, and yet another battle with the limits of human digestion. But for now, you breathe slowly, deeply, through your gloves, and stroll through the palace with practiced grace. Because you are noble. You are powdered. You are perfumed. And you're doing everything in your power not to inhale too sharply near the ficus. The palace is shifting again, like a stage crew preparing for the next act in a never-ending play. Servants light the final rows of candles, maids hurry past with baskets of silk slippers and folded fans, and nobles begin to migrate toward the theater wing, where music, conversation, and low-stakes drama await. And you, of course, are expected to attend. Even if your stomach is still negotiating with that slice of custard tart. You walk toward the main salon, where the pre-show mingling occurs. The floor beneath your polished shoes is a geometric marvel of marble tiles, so pristine it reflects the candlelight like a pond. Beautiful, yes, but treacherous for anyone wearing heels or digesting oysters. Tonight's entertainment is a comedy, or so the program says. A light-hearted play, full of witty dialogue and harmless flirtation. Which, in noble terms, means subtle jabs at other courtiers thinly disguised as characters with suspiciously familiar hairpieces. You're seated near the front, unfortunately. A sign of favor, or possibly a trap. The air is thick with anticipation and something more pungent. You look around. There, 3 seats over, a nobleman with a personal chamber pot tucked beneath his cloak. Discreet. Terrifying. You choose not to make eye contact. A violinist begins to tune. The actors flutter behind the curtain. You fan yourself gently, trying to push the stifling air somewhere else. But it clings, the collective bouquet of perfume, perspiration, and past meals swirling like ghostly soup. You press your lavender glove to your face and breathe through the cotton. Then, the curtain rises. The play begins with a flourish of lute chords and exaggerated bows. The audience chuckles politely. A baroness fans herself dramatically in response to a mildly scandalous joke about milkmaids. You smile, nod, and attempt to follow the plot while simultaneously managing the slow, creeping pressure returning to your abdomen. This is the problem with digestion at Versailles. It doesn't follow etiquette. It doesn't wait for intermission. It certainly doesn't care that you're seated between 2 dukes and 3 embroidered footstools away from your only escape route. You shift in your chair. Big mistake. The wooden frame creaks, your coat tightens, and the sudden movement sends a gurgle through your midsection. Not loud. But not silent either. The lady to your right turns her head ever so slightly. You smile, angelic. She returns it, equally fake. And just like that, you both agree never to speak of it. Now here's a mainstream historical gem for you. Nobles at Versailles often brought their own chairs to court events, not because seating was scarce, but because it was strategic. One's chair might signify rank, status, or even whether one had access to a private stool beneath it. And yes, some were fitted with accommodation features, so to speak. Not many. But enough to start rumors. You eye your chair. Plain. Decorative. Not helpful. As the second act begins, the room warms. People shift uncomfortably, fanning themselves faster. A servant walks the aisles with a tray of lemon water and peppermint-soaked cloths, meant to refresh the senses. You accept one gratefully, dabbing at your forehead. The duke beside you uses his to polish a ring. Priorities. You hear a soft rustle near the stage. One of the actors appears to be stalling, perhaps forgetting a line, or perhaps buying time for the Duchess in the second row to complete her discreet departure. She rises slowly, nods vaguely to no one in particular, and glides toward the side door. A trained exit. She'll be back in 10 minutes. And probably 10 pounds lighter. You consider following her. But you can't risk it. Not yet. You make it through the third act. Barely. You've forgotten the plot entirely. Something about a shepherd, a missing scarf, and a duel involving goose feathers. The crowd claps politely. The curtain falls. You rise with dignity, ignoring the inner churn of your stomach like a true aristocrat. The crowd begins to disperse, and you merge into the stream of nobles exiting toward the grand ballroom. It's cooler here. Slightly. The scent shifts to orange blossom and beeswax. Musicians strike up a minuet. Chandeliers glitter above like stars trapped in crystal. And you? You just want a place to sit down near a scented fan. You drift toward the far corner, where a low bench awaits beneath a painting of Diana the Huntress. It's mostly symbolic. Her gaze seems to say, you will not survive the next cheese course. You sit gingerly. Around you, couples begin to pair off for the opening dances. Breeches and bodices swirl. Fans flap. The court pretends it is graceful, timeless, untouched by biology. Fringe tidbit: Versailles once hosted a dance where everyone wore perfumed gloves and citrus necklaces to combat a particularly bad outbreak of foot rot. They called it the Orange Waltz. The king danced twice, smiling through clenched teeth. No one dared mention the smell. A server passes with a tray of honeyed almonds and brandied peaches. You politely decline. One wrong bite and your digestive system might stage a coup. Another noble joins you on the bench. He leans in and whispers, "They say the cardinal brought a traveling commode. Ivory legs. Velvet seat. Unfair advantage." You raise an eyebrow. "Where is it now?" He smirks. "Already occupied." "Of course it is." The music swells. The dancing intensifies. But you remain seated, a silent warrior in the war of digestion. You survived the theater. You dodged the almonds. And now, you sit in fragrant silence, plotting your next strategic exit. Because noble life isn't about grace under pressure. It's about pretending the pressure doesn't exist. The ballroom is alive with rustling silks and the gentle thudding of heels on waxed floors. You sit on your bench like a seasoned general surveying a battlefield, your lavender-gloved hands folded calmly in your lap, your stomach, not quite calm. It's behaving for now, but you know that feeling, like a minor noble with delusions of grandeur, trouble is rising. You rise, slowly, with composure, and stroll through the ballroom's edge, nodding politely to dancers as they swirl past. A few nobles already look glassy-eyed from too much wine and not enough fresh air. One man is dancing slightly out of time. You hope it's due to rhythm and not a pressing digestive emergency. You've seen that before. The aftermath was memorable. You make your way toward the adjoining gallery, one of those long, echoey corridors filled with ancestral portraits and the occasional forgotten chair. These are the forgotten spaces of Versailles, the in-betweens. And, as you've learned, the in-betweens are sometimes the most essential. You duck into one of the smaller parlors off the hallway, a room with deep green curtains and an oddly shaped urn standing on a pedestal in the corner. The light here is low, the air slightly cooler. For a moment, you think you've found another quiet escape. Then you notice something. The urn. It's too squat. Too accessible. You've seen this before. A friend once made the mistake of complimenting one of these vases and nearly set it down in the wrong place, until a servant whispered, "That's not for flowers, monsieur." You stare at it for a second longer than you should. Is it? Could it be? Yes. It's a chamber pot disguised as decor. This wasn't uncommon. In an era when nobles needed options, fast, clever furniture makers came up with ingenious solutions: commode stools disguised as ottomans, cabinets that opened into thrones, and ornamental vessels with dual functions. Historians still argue whether this was about utility or shame, a refusal to admit that even powdered perfection had its earthly limits. You leave the vase untouched. Someone else may need it more. Probably already has. As you continue your stroll, you pass an antechamber and hear a conversation in progress. "I'm telling you," says one voice, "he mistook it for an ice bucket." A gasp. "Oh no." "Oh yes." Poured wine right into it. The entire salon reeked for hours. You keep walking. You don't want to know who it was. But you make a mental note to avoid any unlabeled containers at tonight's reception. You re-enter the main hall just in time to witness a spectacle: a nobleman, possibly an ambassador, possibly just drunk, tripping over his own scabbard and knocking over what looks like a decorative cabinet. It crashes open, revealing another chamber pot. This one's gilded. The silence is instant. Then, as if someone gave a cue, everyone chuckles. Lightly. Casually. The pot is whisked away by a footman in record time, and the musicians pick up again without missing a beat. Crisis averted. Pride salvaged. You exhale. Now, your body gives you a different kind of warning, less urgent, more mysterious. That uncertain gurgle that could mean anything from a second wind to a ticking clock. You don't know. You don't want to know. You seek a better vantage point. Up ahead is the Hall of Mirrors, where nobles often wander to admire their own reflections and each other's wigs. You walk slowly, trailing your gloved fingers along the polished balustrade, nodding to a lady adjusting the feather on her hat. Her dog barks once. You both ignore it. You step into the hall and pause. 100 candles reflect endlessly along the mirrored walls. Gold leaf gleams from every arch below your feet, a Persian rug muffles footsteps and, one suspects, the occasional disaster. And then you see it. Not a commode. Not a hidden pot. But the telltale gleam of something porcelain tucked behind a velvet chaise. A rogue chamber pot. Left out. Unattended. Dangerous. This is Versailles at its most Versailles: beauty, elegance, and bodily function all pretending not to notice one another. You edge closer. Not to use it, heaven forbid, but out of sheer curiosity. It's unmarked, unguarded, and perilously close to a potted fern. You wonder how many poor souls have made that mistake. You glance over your shoulder. A valet spots you and quickly swoops in, collecting the pot like a stagehand removing a prop. He nods. You nod. Nothing happened. This kind of unscheduled encounter happens more often than you'd think. The palace is so large, so full of nobles, that eventually, someone forgets to signal for the chambermaid, or the pot collector misses a corner. The result? Surprise vessels scattered like porcelain landmines. You find another bench and sit, if only to let your stomach reassess its plans. You've learned that stillness can sometimes lull the body into cooperation. Or betrayal. It's always a gamble. Fringe tidbit: one famed noblewoman of the era allegedly carried her own collapsible chair commode to every event. Folded into her carriage, perfumed and velvet-lined, it was her secret weapon. Her rivals laughed, until they didn't. You watch the ballroom fill again. The dancing resumes. A page runs by carrying what looks like a bundled cushion. You suspect the truth. And suddenly it hits you: you need to go again. Not urgently, but sooner than later. That tart from earlier was a mistake. But this time, you're prepared. You've learned. You have a route. A plan. You rise, smooth your coat, and set off down the mirror-lined hall with all the nobility you can muster. Somewhere ahead, beyond the gilt and candlelight, a porcelain bowl awaits. And you hope, truly hope, it doesn't turn out to be another decorative vase. You walk briskly, but not too briskly, down the hall of mirrors, every step echoing softly off polished stone and reflected 1,000-fold in the glass. To the untrained eye, you're just another nobleman taking in the splendor of Louis XIV's vision. To you, this is a mission. A calculated retreat. Your stomach murmurs again, not angrily this time, but with that peculiar tone of warning it adopts when it's playing tricks. Will it settle? Will it strike? That is the Versailles gamble. You slip past a column, through a side door flanked by unlit sconces, and into one of the lesser galleries. Fewer candles here. Fewer people. Fewer questions. This is where the palace breathes, not in its salons and ballrooms, but in these quiet corridors of woven tapestries and dark wood paneling. It's also where the chamber pots, chairs, and quiet buckets gather like backstage actors waiting for their cue. You round the corner and there they are. The servants. 3 of them, walking in a line, each carrying a porcelain vessel like it's filled with treasure instead of trepidation. The midnight bucket parade, as some of your less delicate friends call it. Though it's not quite midnight yet, the practice is already underway. Nobles have been attending dances, drinking wine, devouring cheese-stuffed poultry, and nature has, inevitably, responded. The servants carry the pots carefully, as if they might explode, some do, in their own tragic way. They wear gloves, usually linen, sometimes waxed, and linen aprons that have seen far too much. Their faces are neutral, trained to blankness. They do not flinch. They do not judge. But they also do not make eye contact. One of them passes you and nods the tiniest nod of all time. Nod of greeting. Of understanding. You nod back, imperceptibly. Brotherhood forged in stink. Now, most of these pots are headed to the sluice room, a sort of no man's land in the palace where all the human evidence is collected, emptied, and scrubbed. The room itself is legend. Steam rises from it like fog from a battlefield. No one who has visited it willingly speaks of it again. You take a different path. Not to the sluice room, of course, but to a hidden corridor near the old chapel, where rumor has it a rarely used commode chair still waits, left over from a previous generation of nobles, forgotten in the architectural shuffle. You reach the corridor and knock softly on the panel wall. There's a click, then a gentle push reveals a narrow servant's stair. You descend. The scent here is different. Damp stone. Soap. Faint ammonia. Not pleasant, but at least it's purposeful. At the bottom of the stairs, you enter a long hallway, and there, tucked into an alcove between 2 old wardrobes, is your destination. The forgotten chair. It's beautiful, actually. Carved wood, gently faded velvet, a discreet lid. A single beeswax candle flickers above it in a wall sconce. This was once a place of dignity. You step forward, lift the lid, and, praise be, it's clean. As you settle in, you reflect, this is noble life in its truest form. Beneath the powdered wigs and embroidered coats, you are just a person, perched over porcelain, praying for peace. Somewhere above, the music swells again. Another minuet. Another toast. Another dancing duchess pretending she isn't about to sprint to the shrubbery. But here, down in the quiet stone chamber, you have time. And space. And relief. A rat scurries in the shadows. You ignore it. The rat, too, is just surviving. Now, about the waste. Normally, a servant would discreetly collect and empty it later, but in this lesser-used part of the palace, the procedure is more rustic. You reach for the linen covering on the shelf beside the chair and carefully place it over the bowl. A small bell is mounted on the wall. 1 ring signals occupied. 2 rings means removal needed. You pull the cord twice. And then you wait. Sure enough, footsteps arrive. The door creaks open, and a young servant, barely more than a boy, nods silently. He retrieves the bowl with practiced ease, his face blank. But before he turns, he pauses, then whispers, "That one's the cleanest in the whole palace." Then he disappears. You sit there for a moment, slightly stunned. Honored, even. Fringe tidbit: some nobles tipped servants for the cleanest pots. It was an unspoken economy within the palace, quiet exchanges of coin and favor for what was, at the end of the day, a very personal service. Some servants became quite powerful, not for what they said, but for what they never said. You reassemble your layers with care. You are lighter now. More composed. You extinguish the candle and climb the servant's stair back to civilization. As you emerge once more into the gilded corridors, you realize the palace has transformed again. Candles burn lower. Laughter is louder, looser. A couple stumbles past you, giggling, one of them holding an empty goblet and the other missing a shoe. A maid follows discreetly, carrying a small pot. You smile. Because now, you are the dangerous one. You are the noble who has been. Who has seen. Who has conquered the chair of velvet and emerged triumphant. You stroll back into the ballroom with the air of someone who has absolutely nothing to fear. A viscount greets you with a raised brow. You look refreshed. You bow slightly. Must be the candlelight. He nods, pretending not to understand. You both know. But neither of you will ever say a word. You're back in the ballroom now, gliding like someone freshly reborn, light on your feet, calm in your gut, and just smug enough to enjoy the sweet obliviousness of those around you who haven't yet made their own secret journey. The chandeliers shimmer above you like frozen fireworks. Harpsichord music dances through the air, lightly powdered with the occasional cough, the whinny of a far-off carriage, and the faint, ever-present scent of 20 perfumes battling for dominance. You've earned this. A moment of stillness. A moment of superiority. And then you see it. The chair. Not just any chair. The chair. It sits near the north arch of the ballroom, guarded subtly by 2 servants in muted livery, and claimed only by the most favored courtiers. It's not particularly ornate, no gilding, no elaborate carving, but it has one vital distinction: arms. A chair with arms is a luxury not afforded to everyone. In the court of Versailles, even sitting is governed by strict etiquette. The number of arms on your seat? A direct reflection of your place in the hierarchy. Only royalty or those granted special privilege are permitted the embrace of elbow support. You have, until now, survived on armless benches, perching politely on stiff stools, your back straight, hands folded demurely in your lap. But tonight, just maybe, you could ascend. You're clean, you're poised, and you've got time. You approach. But a tall, over-wigged marquise beats you to it. She swoops into the chair with the force of a falcon catching prey, and you are left standing in her lavender wake. Ah well. You bow politely, as one does, and retreat to the second-tier seating nearby, a sturdy little settee where elbow contact is accidental and unappreciated. As you lower yourself, a count to your left leans in and whispers, "She's had it for 27 minutes. Protocol says no more than 25. You murmur, "Someone should inform the steward." He raises an eyebrow. "I am the steward." "Ah. Well then." You both smile. Now here's a mainstream fact for you. In Louis XIV's court, the presence of a chair in a room was not casual, it was ceremonial. Only the king sat freely. Nobles stood until permission was granted. Even queens had to await a royal nod to lower themselves onto a cushion. The phrase tabaret privilege referred specifically to this right, the permission for a court lady to sit, and how she was allowed to sit. Historians still argue whether this rule originated purely from hierarchy, or whether it was a practical tactic to keep people from staying too long in one room. Either way, it made chairs powerful symbols, and sitting a political act. You shift slightly. The bench you're on is firm and upholstered in a crimson fabric that's seen better days. There's a scent. Something faintly vinegary. You lean back cautiously and hope it's just the varnish. Across the room, a gentleman drops his cane. A servant retrieves it instantly and bows. Another man, perhaps emboldened, gestures toward the marquise in the chair and says, far too loudly, "She must be very tired indeed." Gasps. Ripples of laughter. Someone coughs to cover the silence. The marquise, to her credit, does not flinch. She simply fans herself slowly, with the calm of someone who knows the king once kissed her gloved hand in front of witnesses. She stays seated. The message is clear. You, meanwhile, feel a different kind of shift. A gurgle, not ominous, just informative. A reminder that victory is temporary. You consider your options. You've exhausted most of the reliable hiding spots. And while the velvet-lined chamber off the main library is appealing, it's currently closed for cleaning. Someone's poodle had a situation earlier. You overheard it in passing. Tragic. For the rug, mostly. A more pressing problem, though, emerges beside you. To your right, a young viscount rises from his stool with a panicked glance and an urgent whisper, "Where's the nearest porcelain?" He doesn't wait for a reply. Just sprints. He's not subtle. The steward beside you sighs. "Third one tonight." And then, with a faint note of amusement, and it's only 10:30. The evening continues. The music rises again, now a gentle waltz. Couples move in deliberate circles, the rhythm of wealth and refinement. You watch as their faces glow in candlelight, serene above tightly corseted torsos and increasingly burdened digestive systems. Fringe tidbit: during particularly long court sessions, it was customary for some nobles to wear bourdelle pots, a kind of portable urinal tucked beneath voluminous skirts or coats. Originally designed for women, but eventually adapted by desperate men. Concealment was the name of the game. You stand again, not because you must, but to preserve your dignity in circulation. The bench has grown warm. Worryingly warm. You pretend it's from your coat. As you pass the pillar near the refreshments table, you glance inside the urn used to hold orange water. Just in case. Still orange water. Still safe. You drift toward the terrace, hoping for cooler air. The doors are open, the night breeze trickling in like mercy itself. You lean on the balustrade and inhale deeply. The scent here is gentler, night-blooming flowers, a trace of wood smoke, distant rain. You stay there longer than necessary. Behind you, the marquise finally rises from the chair. A dozen eyes track her departure. A servant swoops in, wipes the seat with a perfumed cloth, and backs away as if from an altar. The chair waits. You do not take it. You've moved past such things. Because you, dear friend, have seen the world behind the curtains. The sluice rooms. The secret chairs. The disguised vases. And with every passing hour, you've become more than just a courtier. You've become a survivor. By now, you've developed the instincts of a seasoned Versailles veteran, an inner compass that detects the proximity of a discreet chamber pot, the safest path across a crowded ballroom, and the faintest whiff of betrayal wrapped in lavender. You linger on the terrace, letting the cool air soothe your powdered cheeks. The stars above are barely visible through the hazy candleglow pouring from the windows, but you find them comforting anyway. Nature, at least, doesn't care if you're wearing a velvet waistcoat or if you skip the Bordelot pot in favor of optimism. Behind you, the court continues in its relentless, glittering swirl. A footman brings out more wine. A group of lesser nobles play cards beside the fountain, laughing too loudly. One of them gestures animatedly and sloshes wine onto his breeches. The others pretend not to see it. You watch, sip the last of your diluted orange water, and brace yourself. Because you know what comes next. Supper. Not dinner, mind you. You've already survived that ordeal. Supper is the late-night follow-up, an afterthought for the indulgent and the unlucky, those who've danced too hard, drunk too much, or simply refused to end the night without another helping of pickled walnuts and poached pear. You head back inside just as a bell chimes. The servants flow like a tide of linen and soft shoes, setting out platters, decanters, and mysterious covered dishes. The smell hits you at once: warm meat, sharp cheese, sweet brandy sauces. Your stomach recoils slightly, like a cat presented with a bowl it didn't ask for. You sit, of course. That's what's expected. A shallow bowl of game stew is placed before you. It glistens. It bubbles. You reach for the spoon. A duchess beside you leans over and murmurs, "Careful. The last time they served this, my brother-in-law didn't make it past the footstool." You smile. But you don't need it. A safer choice arrives: bread. Hard, crusty, nearly medieval. You nibble, mostly for show. Across the table, the Marquis de Font's face is beginning to glisten in a way that suggests he gambled on the stew. He grips the edge of the table. You look away. And then it happens. A thump behind the tapestry. Everyone hears it. No one reacts. The musicians play louder. This is Versailles. You know, by now, that the palace conceals everything: secrets, scandals, and sometimes an unconscious viscount who didn't pace himself. A servant discreetly slips behind the wall. Moments later, a vase is repositioned. Life continues. Here's a mainstream historical note: Versailles was a place where politics, gossip, and bodily functions existed in perpetual performance. Every glance, every bow, every bite of unidentifiable meat was calculated. But beneath it all, nobles were human. And the architecture, for all its splendor, didn't hide the mess, it merely layered it in gold. Back at your table, someone suggests dancing again. You make your excuses. You've danced enough. With powdered wigs and fragile intestines, one must choose their risks wisely. You stand and make your way through the hall once more, nodding to the poet who has now slouched sideways in a chair, mumbling couplets to a cushion. A dog is chewing something unidentifiable near the fireplace. You don't look too closely. And then you pass the king's corridor. It's dimly lit, silent, and polished like a mirror. The king has long since retired to his chambers, those famed rooms where even his most personal habits are attended by a select audience. Yes, even that. Louis XIV had a special room for his royal seat, a toilet disguised as a carved wooden throne. A valet would stand nearby, respectfully silent, perhaps humming softly. It was a position of honor. Access to that room meant access to power. Literally and politically. Historians still debate whether Louis found it dignified or simply efficient. Either way, nobles begged to be nearby during these royal moments. The throne was real. The metaphor was unshakable. You pass the corridor and think of the irony, even kings couldn't escape the daily struggle. They just had better seats. Fringe tidbit: some nobles believed certain foods improved their political fortunes, like truffles for favor, or almonds for eloquence. One famously ate nothing but onions for a month, hoping to cure gout and increase wisdom. He was later banned from 3 salons for persistent fragrance. You step out into the southern gallery, where a quiet group plays a slow string quartet. You settle onto a window bench, resting your hands on your knees. Your gloves are perfumed, your posture impeccable, and your abdomen, holding victory. At least for now. A young servant passes with a pitcher. He offers you a drink. You decline. Too risky. You watch as the pitcher tilts toward another courtier, who sips and smiles, bravely or foolishly, you can't tell. You lean back against the wall and let your gaze drift toward the candlelit windows. The palace is winding down. Slowly. Reluctantly. But it never truly sleeps. Even now, servants are emptying pots. Nobles are sneaking off for final walks. Someone, somewhere, is fanning themselves beside a chaise with a look of haunted grace. You've nearly survived the full day. And you've done it with your composure, your dignity, and your breeches intact. You are not just a noble. You are a master of the invisible dance. The eternal struggle between grace and gas. And in this round, you won. The palace is quieter now, like a great animal settling into sleep. Candles burn lower in their sconces, casting long, flickering shadows across the parquet floors. The harpsichord has gone still. The dancers have drifted away like fog. Even the dogs have stopped barking. You walk slowly now, not because you're tired, but because everything else is. Servants begin their final rounds, some with linens, others with silver trays of half-eaten fruit and untouched jellies. And, of course, some carry the night's final burden, the chamber pots. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. Clutched like delicate bombs, cradled in cloths, their porcelain sides warm from human contact. A pot for every room. A memory of every noble stomach that dared to dine after midnight. You pass them in the hall. One gives you a weary nod, and you nod back. There's no shame in it anymore. You return to your chambers, where your valet awaits with slippers, warm gloves, and your nightshirt, a flowing thing with far too many buttons. The bed has been turned down, the curtains drawn, and a small bouquet of dried lavender rests beneath your pillow. And, of course, beside the bed, your chamber pot. It sits under its velvet-lined stand like a loyal companion. Gilded, discreet, slightly ridiculous. You stare at it, then at your valet, who raises an eyebrow in silent question. You shake your head. Not yet. You've already made your final trip for the night. Probably. He bows and withdraws. You're alone now. Just you, your chamber, and the soft crackle of the fireplace. You strip off your coat, peel off your breeches, and slip into the cool linens of your canopied bed. The mattress groans. You sigh. The quiet is profound. The moonlight spills through the slats in your shutters. Somewhere, an owl hoots. Or maybe it's just a very tired courtier. You let your thoughts wander. To the duchess who commandeered the armchair. To the marquise who fainted politely into a punch bowl. To the unfortunate fellow who mistook a floral vase for salvation. And to yourself, the survivor of it all. It wasn't just a day in the life of a French noble. It was a marathon. You endured layers of silk, endless digestion, clouds of powder, and the ever-looming question, where's the nearest relief? And now, finally, you're horizontal. At peace. The lavender beneath your pillow begins to work its magic. You blink slower. Your body softens into the mattress. Your powdered hair rustles gently against linen that smells faintly of starch and yesterday's perfume. You made it. Tomorrow, there will be more rituals. More dancing. More cheese. And yes, more pots. But that's tomorrow's burden. Tonight, you sleep like royalty. Or at least like someone with a pot close by and no reason to move. Wind down. The fire crackles gently as your breathing slows. Your limbs grow heavier beneath the warmth of the quilted coverlet, and the room seems to breathe with you, quiet, rhythmic, safe. The soft glow of the embers casts tiny shadows that flicker across the drapes, like old memories fading into the night. You've walked polished marble halls, bowed to kings, danced with powdered elegance, and tiptoed past invisible lines of etiquette and digestive doom. You've learned the subtle art of navigating a world where grace must survive alongside goose stew and perfumed gloves. Now, it's all behind you. The chamber pot waits quietly, a silent sentinel of noble knights. The tapestries no longer whisper. The perfumes fade to the faintest trace of lavender and beeswax. And the noise, the pressure, the constant watchfulness, it all dissolves now, replaced by the soft hum of night and the gentle hush of sleep. Let your thoughts float gently, drifting past candlelit corridors, slipping between the silken sheets of memory and imagination. Let your body rest, your breath deepen, and your mind grow quiet. There's nothing left to do. No more performances. No more powdered composure. Just sleep. Slow, peaceful, deep. And when you wake, the palace will wait. But for now, let the curtains fall.